Hello. I'm back to do another, replay review. This time I'm gonna do a pair of games that I actually played. I'm actually gonna do two games. Um, yeah. So for this set of games, there's actually two tournament games, and I played it in the sort of newbie friendly uh tournament that was running green level clearance, like the weekly one. Um, well, not the weekly one, the one that's happening over multiple weeks. And yeah, so my opponent is actually quite new. He played, I think if I remember correctly, he had only played 10 games total at the time that we played. So this is actually kind of an introductory game. Um, so yeah, uh, so the weird thing about basically both the games that we're kind of playing now is that we didn't actually take a look at either of the decks. I thought I planned on doing it and then just ended up not doing it. Same thing for my opponent. Well, we had a slight scheduling mishap on my end, and I sort of we started an hour earlier than he was expecting. So he also doesn't know the decks that he's playing right now. But since it's just kind of an intro game, there's nothing, or sorry, a pair of intro decks. There's nothing super complicated going on with these games. But I think there's just sort of enough to talk about vaguely on a strategic level, probably, at least on the turn to turn level that we could talk about. And yeah, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do it. Oh, also there's a few sort of deck deck building. I know the default decks, but deck the way the decks are constructed means that the dynamic of the game will lead a certain way, and I'll just sort of explain that afterwards because this is sort of like an intro game, and if you want to see it, then I'll leave it to the very end to talk about it in case you just want to watch the game and then waiting for the intro strategy talk to happen afterwards. Um, yeah. Oh, also I changed some production stuff. Notably, I have my face is on here now. I'm not sure if it's a good idea necessarily, but we'll see. And I also put probably a lot of effort fiddling with this thing, which I'm not sure if it's actually going to be useful, but it's something that I've got now. So, uh, well, maybe it'll be useful. We'll find out. Anyways, yeah. So, let's just talk about the game. Sort of the first thing actually is I should probably talk about my starting hand and my decision to mulligan and or not mulligan. Uh, Something I should probably say before playing the game actually is that a lot of my decisions I sort of did kind of automatically, and sort of my excuse in this case is just sort of that I was trying to sort of explain things. I was more focused on making sure that this was a good a good introductory game for my opponent rather than you know making sure that all my decisions were correct. Uh, I probably should have at least put more effort into making sure my decisions were correct, but everything I just sort of did just sort of a lot on autopilot, and there's some things I thought about and some things I did, which I guess is true of every tournament game. And yeah, we'll just go ahead and talk about all that stuff later on. And like I said, I paid attention to the spoiler, stuff. So I know basically what a lot of these cards do, but I don't know what all the cards do because I haven't played with it. I haven't like internalized what every card does. So there's going to be a fair amount of misplays because of that reason too. I think halfway through this game, I actually went and looked up the deck list just to see. I want to say I looked it up to figure out my agenda count for a specific reason that I'll get into later. But yeah, that's sort of at least that's my excuse for why I've sort of done a lot of misplays during this game that I'm gonna criticize later on. So this thing over here, where what I did was I didn't start with any econ. I didn't mulligan. I'm not sure why I didn't mulligan. I probably just wasn't thinking about it. Just hit okay, go. Probably I'm assuming it was because I saw some econ cards, and I'll just I'll just do this. Uh, Maybe in a future game I could talk about, or a future replay review, I could talk about some of my mulligan choices and why I would mulligan, for this reason or that reason. But for now, we'll just leave it as is. I think I probably made a mistake not mulliganing, based on the way my hand looks right now at the end of this first turn. Um, Maybe I just decided based on the fact that I had an end run ice and all that stuff. The other thing that you'll sort of note is that there's some weirdness going on with Jinteki right now. At least particularly specifically related to the replays. Um, you'll notice that there's no. Maybe now it's not. No, maybe that's not the time. But you'll notice that there's no cards in the stack. No, this should say 5 cards in the grip, but it doesn't say that. This should say whatever 30 odd cards in R&D. It doesn't say that. I think I specifically did the math during this game to do that count, but we can't. We obviously can't do that here. Yeah. So this first turn, installed this for here, and installed 2 Nico campaigns, and this is sort of based on my opening turn. So you'll notice immediately, I hit keep and I shouldn't have kept. I should have mulliganed, and you'll sort of immediately notice sort of the fallout from that, which is that my HQ is so ridiculously vulnerable. I do have an end of run ice, so like if my opponent decides not to run, then maybe I could push out this agenda immediately, because I wouldn't expect them to be able to get to that server immediately, which may or may not be true, because again, I have not paid attention to the starting decks. I don't know if they have a lot of tricks against the servers and all that, but I installed 2 assets just completely vulnerable, easy to trash. I have an HQ that is extremely vulnerable, and I have 2 ice, which you're gonna see the problems based on that immediately. Yeah. So I think this first turn was probably a big mistake. Like everything from the mulligan into the first turn was probably a big mistake on my end. So my opponent does something. Oh, I forgot to say. So the thing about the starter decks is that they're smaller than usual deck sizes that you're allowed in Netrunner. You see that this is a 30 card deck, which means I start with 34 cards in the deck list, and I'll also post the deck list somewhere probably. And this one has 30 cards. So in the game, in the first any game that you start play with this sort of deck, or this pair of decks, is that you both should only play till 6 points. If either player gets to 6 points, the game should end and that player wins. So we did right here is we just both set our agenda points to +1, just so that we wouldn't have to like worry about it later on. So my opponent does something which I think is pretty reasonable here, which is sure gamble and then run on these 2 things just to sort of make sure I wasn't sneaking anything through, and they actually trash both of them. And to me, those just feel like entirely reasonable things. If you run on both these things and you see them, I think it makes sense to trash them, because to me, it feels like he has a reasonable economy set up. And actually, looking at this, he also has a red team in hand. He has carbon. This sort of all makes sense. Yeah, all basically makes sense. I don't think that there's any like huge mistakes or anything. Yeah, he even has this econ card in his hand. So like, oh sorry, I'm completely misread this. So sure gamble. I got some feedback where I should probably spend more time explicitly talking about. So these assets that I installed, they're Nico campaigns. They're like drip economy that money will come in over time. I installed them so I could res them next turn and hopefully get some more money later on. Even if it was just 1 credit each. In hindsight, I probably should have installed these 2, like not installed these 2 and just clicked for credits. But, not knowing the economy base of my opponent is difficult to say one way or the other. Like, sorry, not knowing the deck list of my opponent. But yeah, I probably should have just installed one of these, just in one, maybe even just one of these, because I do end up into a bit of a credit crunch later on. And my opponent just ended up playing a Shrink Gamble, which is, you know, a basic money card, running on the two things, trashing them. And then playing another basic money card, Creative Commission, which is one of the new cards. And yeah, it's just Shaper, Sure Gamble, 4, 5, 6. They seem pretty good. Yep. So here I just sort of try to rush out this agenda. And so I do want to say right now that I think in particularly in this matchup, I think it's a good idea to sort of rush out your agendas. And we'll talk about more about that later on. So I don't think that this was necessarily a big mistake to try to push this out. And I don't think that it was necessarily a huge tell that to say that I had a very soft hand. Soft hand meaning like a hand that's weak to attack. But yeah, something in particular I would like to note is that right now I have exactly enough money to score this agenda and also res this slice. So if crit over here were to run on this agenda, I will be able to res it and also immediately score this and like to keep them out and then score this agenda afterwards. Yep. Yeah. Which, you know, might end up meaning that I run into some problems with the economy later on, but you know, whatever. Lessons learned. So he installs a Carmen and runs, which like to me is entirely reasonable. We both don't have like a good sense of what the ice is. We don't have a good sense of how they'll match up with the icebreakers. And like the thing is, I think that just making this run just as a sort of speculative thing is fine. I think if I remember correctly, I think it was Crit who said it, is that he had watched some videos before and he felt like putting a lot of pressure on your opponent is probably a good idea as the runner to make a lot of runs, force ice resing, force the economy, force the corp to be out sort of on the back foot. And this was part of it. And we'll sort of see how that pays off. But for here, I'll just res the Palisade, keep it out. This is entirely within expectation. Oh, sorry about that. This is entirely within expectations for me, where I had $6. I was gonna res this and this was afterwards, all according to plan. From my end, yep. This run ended, and so looking at his hand now, I probably would have installed the red team and then run HQ for basically to keep to like get at least some value from the red from running. But yeah, but he does the score, and I think it's all reasonable. And for his last click, he plays Creative Commission. So like I don't think this is necessarily a mistake, but for me personally, I probably would have installed that red team. Actually, would he have had enough money? It costs 5. Oh no, actually, he didn't have enough money, so never mind. Forget it. We also sort of talked about this particular interaction here. Is that I wasn't sure if it would have been correct to to install the Carmen here. Again, we don't know each other's deck lists. We probably should have had a better idea of each other's deck lists, but whatever. Because I think it is entirely on my biases, where there was a time where installing a breaker and then running on the remote might have been a mistake, because there's ice trashing. I mean, not ice trashing. There's program trashing subroutines on a lot of ice, right? And in this particular case, it wasn't gonna happen because the Carmen is essentially itself, and it's pretty unlikely for the corporation to be able to trash your crash your breakers using a ice that is not a sentry. So the carbon would have been a defensive measure. But I didn't think that it was a good idea at the time for him to install this. And again, I'm sure it was partially because of my biases. Because there's also, you know, ice that could do damage and like knock the brick out of your hand. And yeah, it's just sort of balancing the risk of installing, spending the 5 credits and a click and a card versus for like immediate to save your tempo, save your credits versus, you know, taking the hit. So let's just go ahead and just continue past this. He runs HQ, he scores this agenda, and I didn't love, but it was within expectations because, like I said, my HQ was very soft. Like going back to that and like very first decision not to mulligan that kind of bad hand, but you know, that's life. Sometimes you live with those mistakes. So instead of scoring this out, instead click for 3 credits. And I think this decision would probably be fine. I think. Again, I don't remember exactly what I was thinking at the time. Maybe I was just running on autopilot and click for 3 credits instead of scoring this out. I'm not sure if I love that decision for me. I think I probably should have just scored this out. But you know, whatever. I might have understood clicking for credits if I had drawn into some economy card that would benefit from me clicking for credits 3 times. You know, like some sort of hedge fund or whatever where I could play it and not be down to exactly 0 to score this out. But I don't know. It's kind of weird. I'm not sure what I was thinking. What I might have been thinking is that if I scored, it went down to exactly 0. I would not love being on 0 credits and not being able to, let's say, install an agenda behind here. Like if I had drawn an agenda, like, sorry, to clarify, the ability of the superconducting hub is, you know, you draw 2 cards when you score it, right? If I was on 0 credits, I would not want to draw because if I drew into agendas, it would be like 4 turns before I could score, before I would be able to score that next agenda, which wouldn't have been good. But, you know, fine. If I was planning, if I thought a bit more, I probably should have put the off-world office behind the ice instead of the superconducting hub, because 7 credits is, you know, pretty good, and getting this stolen is worse than getting this stolen. And yes, I was on low credits, but you know, we're here to talk about my mistakes. Yeah. So what does my opponent do? My opponent goes here, draws a card, runs on this Bran. I guess this, like I said, putting pressure on the corp, I think is probably fine. Yeah. I don't think there's like a huge mistake here or anything. I could have rezzed it, gone down to 0. I don't. I'm not sure. Actually, I do know what happens immediately after this, but I still wouldn't have rezzed it regardless. Yeah, because going down to 0 would be pretty rough in this situation. Anyways, my opponent steals the send a message. It was rough getting 3 points off a single access. Sad for me. So far, made 3 runs, but made 2 random accesses and got 5 points off of it. Not good for me, but you know, that's life. That's the way Netrunner works sometimes. Yeah. And he runs on HQ again. So actually, let's just sort of stop here. Let's just take a break here. I really think that he should have installed the red team at some point, because rewinding way back, well, not way back, rewinding back to the previous turn. If he didn't install the Carmen, instead ran here. Let's go back all the way here. No, going back here. Right. Instead of installing the Carmen, run here and just ran here first click. Been bounced out. Second click, install the red team. Third click, use it. Fourth click, use it again. I think he would be in a better economic position, but I don't think it's like a huge mistake or anything. So let's just continue back where, you know, here he runs R&D, he gets the thing. He could have cleared off most of this red team, like gotten most of the money off of it. I think in future rounds, I would probably expect to be able to make a lot of free runs on HQ and R&D, but you know, whatever. And last click, he draws a whole crap ton of cards with Verification, which, you know, makes sense. It all makes sense. He also notably draws into the Breaker, which is probably going to be bad for me. So it's a good thing I scored this. Or do I score this? Yes, I do score this. And I draw these cards. Actually, let's rewind just a little bit. So here I draw into this Regolith mining license. And actually, the turn before I actually draw into the seamless launch. That's the thing I want to highlight. I drew into the seamless launch. So I wouldn't necessarily play the seamless launch in this situation all the time. In this case, I did because HQ felt very soft. My opponent is on 5 points. I don't always want to draw a bunch of cards. So the reason why I played the seamless launch to score this super conductive hub, like having an extra click at the end after scoring, is that it would let me, if I drew into an agenda and felt very vulnerable, I would have put the agenda behind here. And yes, my opponent did draw, you know, a whole bunch of cards and maybe would have drawn into the Breaker, but I think because he was at 5 points, or you know, 6 agenda points out of 7, whatever. Whatever way you want to think about it, the next agenda score he would have won. I wanted to have at least some protection for it, you know. So I wanted a click after I did my 2 draws, so I would have the opportunity to install if I drew an agenda to put it behind there. And that was sort of the logic behind using this event. I wouldn't always use this event, but in this particular case, because I felt very much on the back foot, I felt like I needed to be playing more defensively, at least for a while, to just sort of stabilize and, you know, do that. I put this behind the ice because I felt like from here I would have to basically recover economically. So, you know, I would put this behind here, and the next turn I would just hit it a bunch of times just to make money because I needed money. So the next few turns, the next few like actions for my opponent make total sense to me, which is to install the Breaker. Cleaver breaks Palisade. Kind of gracefully. It's 3 credits, which I think is that the right price? 1, 2, 3. Yep, 3 credits, and I think it all makes sense. He sees this. Unfortunately, is not at enough credits to trash it. I'm not sure what he was thinking. I'm not sure if he expected it to be an agenda or not. But at the same time, looking at his sort of stuff, I mean, I guess he also doesn't know the trash cost of things because, you know, of course he's new. I would have preferred getting a little bit of money and maybe trashing this because I am in such a bad economic position. I'm at 4 credits. And I would have to click for a lot more credits. Yeah. And you see how it does this in the reverse order. You'll notice that he does this in the reverse order. If he did it the other way around, he would have had the 3 credits to trash it, and he would have been on 0. But I would have been on 4, and he would have been able to prevent me from doing what I do right here, which is Click this 3 times to go all the way up to 11 credits. And like from here, I'm not like in a comfortable position, but the recovery looks a lot more likely from this position, right? And it'll sort of depend on what everybody has, This sort of all is reasonable, I think. Is this reasonable? I guess since the last time he ran HQ, I had drawn 4 cards. Yeah, I drawn a bunch of cards. I think this jailbreak run. Oh, by the way, I should probably spend more time highlighting cards. This jailbreak run, it is run HQ or R&D. If successful, draw 1 card. When you breach the attack server, access 1 additional card. So when he accesses this server, I think it's totally reasonable for him to try to make this attack. Since I've drawn a lot of cards since then. To be honest, I wouldn't have put a huge. Would I put a huge rush on it? Actually, you know what? Let's just rewind. I just want to see. Does he know that I have got extra ice in hand? Does he know that I could lock this down now that I have more money? Yeah, actually, he had no idea what I had in my hand. So, like, it's possible I had plenty of agendas in hand. So, actually, this kind of makes sense. I guess you could also sort of do the math and figure out how many points I am likely to have drawn at this point. Let's just sort of do this now, since, why the hell not? 1, 2, 3, 4. Usually I would use this. Like, usually I would use this number here to do the math, but, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I'd drawn 13 cards. And 5, 6 points are scored. So actually, I have drawn way above the expected amount of agenda points, and he sees that I've drawn way above the expected amount of agenda points. But it's not like the math that you do is not the math that you do when you do that is not. Is it way above actually? I drawn 6 points, 13 cards, 5. Okay, so it's just slightly. He has seen slightly above average, but it's not like way above average. And actually, let's just sort of talk about this. And someone also asked me to talk about this last time. For every 5 cards you draw, you should expect to draw about 2 points. So I drew 13 cards, divide by 5, and let's just round this up. Just do rough rounding. I drew 13 cards, so let's just say 15. So I would have expected to have drawn into 6 points. So 15 divide by 5 is 3 times 2 is 6. So, you would have expected to draw 6 points when you draw 15 cards. So doing the math is sometimes helpful, but it also depends on the way your opponent has been playing. But in this specific case, I don't feel like I had a lot of the leeway to make a lot of decisions. I think that everything I've done is pretty much automatic, at least since the mulligan. Well, not necessarily since the mulligan. Like the decision point was whether to use the seamless launch or not. But I have not felt like I had a lot of decisions to make. Maybe I could have like spent 1 less click here and installed a piece of ice, and I should have thought about that a bit more. But so far, I have not had a lot of strategic decisions to make, at least in my mind. Anyways, he makes this run and he sees 2 ice, and now he sees a bit more from HQ, which I think is all reasonable. And he sets up more money. Did I actually? Sure. This all sort of makes sense. Yep. And he just sort of sets up his economy. I might have like quibbled over like maybe he should have installed the red team and done this and then this and this, but it's all like reasonable. On the whole, he's doing reasonable decisions. And you know what, for now, let's just only worry about sort of the reasonable decisions. I clear off this. install a piece of ice. So in hindsight, I probably should have installed the piece of ice over R&D, because if he gets into R&D, I'm like just any random access. He has a pretty. It just means that he could win, and I don't know why I even put this here. I definitely should have put it over R&D, or put something over R&D at least. Just to sort of, you know, dissuade a random R&D run, because he knows he could guaranteed get into R&D. If he has some form of multi-access, he could just guaranteed get in there, no problem at all. Well, not no problem at all, but you know, this I also should probably pay more attention to the type of ice I'm putting on there. At the time, I just put this white space over here because I was like, oh, his code gate, he doesn't have the code gate breaker. I'll just dump it over here. Sort of running on autopilot. Not necessarily a good idea. Probably should have put, this in front of R&D, or... So I didn't want to put the Palisade in front of R&D because that would have just been bad. Yeah, probably should have put the white space in front of R&D, because if you look at my hand, I don't even have the ability to... I don't have an agenda to score. If I top deck an agenda on my first click, like not my first, for mandatory draw, I could install, and then advance it if it's, the 4-2. And I think it is around this time that I sort of look up my deck list and sort of look at what I could be doing. So maybe that's why I put the white space in front of server 3, just to sort of set up. And if I mandatorily draw my another send a message, of which I think there are 3. Let me double check that. Let's just look that up right now. Let's just look that up right now. So we are playing with a corpse starter pack, right? Oops, spoilers. There is 2 send a messages in the deck. So if I draw my other one, maybe I'm putting this here so that if I draw my other one next click, I can just install in advance. Maybe that's what I was thinking. I still don't necessarily love that decision. I probably should have put, put this white space over here. But, decisions. I think that sort of aggression that my opponent does kind of makes sense, entirely makes sense. The more time goes by, the more frustrated I am at the fact that he's not installing the red team, but it's fine. The fact that he hasn't, the fact that he plays the VR-cation kind of frustrates me, but it's not like it's completely unreasonable to do this. Oh yeah, hey look, my opponent decides to just do overclock just for value. So actually something I do want to talk about here is that after having paid some attention to the ice, paid some attention to the breakers, I think that breaking overclock with money, unless you have to, is probably a bad decision. I think that if you're planning on running on a brand, breaking it with Cleaver, spending $8, $8 is a lot of money. I think given the ability, you would probably use the click ability on brand, which is to say that, so the thing about Biroids in general is that every Biroid has the ability for the runner to spend clicks instead of spending credits, instead of using the breakers. So when we do this sort of math here, in order to use Cleaver to break Bran, it costs $8. You see here, $8. I think Cleaver is usually fairly reasonable in terms of break efficiency for everything except for Bran, for everything except for high strength ice, because I like that's sort of the way they balance the card. Because you'll notice here, breaks 2 subroutines for $1, but increasing strength is so expensive. And yeah, it starts at a pretty high strength, but still it's so expensive to increase strength. Um, so yeah, in particular, I think that breaking Bran with Cleaver is probably a bad idea. At least, um, at least in these starter decks. I know I will probably call them corset decks a lot. They're not corset decks. They're gateway decks. They're gateway starter decks, whatever you call them. And like I said, I probably should have put this over here. What was I thinking? Probably my head was empty. I wasn't thinking. Uh, but anyways, crit, access the card. I am pretty lucky here that it wasn't an agenda. But you know, if he had scored, if he had scored, what was it, 6 points from 6 random accesses, I would have been pretty sad as well. But he tresses an Kritokrator, another new card, and I should say again, every single card in these decks is a new card, barring Sure Gamble and Hedge Fund, but everything else is a new card. And this is sort of the new. I keep on wanting to say July Bug, but it's not. Kritokrator is sort of a trap, and a trap as in an ambush that I can install on a server and sort of bait the runner into accessing. And yeah, he just trashes it. It costs 2. It's more expensive to trash than Junebug, which is the old version of this old quote unquote old version of this card. It's not quite the same thing, but it's close enough that from now on, whenever I talk about Arctic Disciple, I will probably for the rest of time call it either the new Junebug or July Bug, because July comes after June. But yeah, he accesses, he trashes it. I think it makes sense to trash it. Well, actually, it doesn't make sense to trash it. Actually, let's look. Let's look. I guess he doesn't know what this is. So he doesn't know how expensive it will be to get into here. Does the decision to trash this make sense? So there's this concept in Netrunner called an R&D lock. And I'll actually talk about this now, is that in some decks, as the runner and against some corps, you're going to be able to see every single card the corporation draws before they draw it. It's a strategy that you could follow sometimes, where trashing a card, yes, it denies me from drawing it, but also it means that I'm going to draw a card that you don't see if you're the runner, right? And I don't think we're at the point yet where you want to start worrying about doing a complete R&D lock. Especially because I have this brand in front of here, and it's going to be very, very difficult for you to get through. Especially with your breaker being Cleaver. But towards the end of the game, sometimes you'll find that if the corporation has like an insurmountable remote, you'll have to just run R&D every turn to make sure that the corporation doesn't draw an agenda. And like I said, in this case, I don't think we're quite at that point yet, but I do think it was a viable option for my opponent to just not trash Urtica Cypher, to let me just draw into it. And because it's probably less of a threat than me drawing an agenda. But, it's kind of whatever, I think. If only because you don't know what this is. He didn't know what this was. If I draw into agenda, I could install advance, and there would be nothing he could do about it, right? I draw into this thing, which is fine. I draw into this thing, which is less fine. So first click I draw, and I don't know why I did this. Honestly, I'm thinking about it. I'm not necessarily sure if this was a good idea. Because I didn't know. Well, I guess I probably would have pushed it. And I guess this is one of those deck dynamic things that I'll talk about later on at the end. But I draw again. I throw it in here because, I throw it in here. And I install another Palisade here. And I probably should have installed the brand instead. especially having noticed that, I'm not sure if I noticed it, but having seen that it costs 8 to break with Cleaver, especially seeing this white space here, it would lock down this server a lot better. This is probably a big mistake just because of how expensive it is. Because yeah, yeah, just having made some tiny mistakes here and there. Well, not necessarily tiny. I think this is actually a pretty big mistake here, installing the wrong ice here instead of the brand. But lessons learned. It's possible I was thinking that I didn't want. I would obviously, given the opportunity, I would obviously want to res the brand using send a message instead of paying the hard dollars for it. But I don't think I was in a bad economic position anymore. Yeah. Okay. So quick installs this here, installs run HQ, installs a penny shaver, which is rewards him for running HQ. I knew that penny shaver existed. I'm not sure if I So I get why he has the urge to run HQ. Or rather, I get why he has the urge to run right now. Because there are a lot of cards that he hasn't seen. So the first replay review I said that I didn't want to see my opponent's hand, and I didn't want to spend a lot of time worrying about this. In this specific case, I don't love this penny shaper install to run to get $1. I would have much preferred a credit. So first click, he clears this off. So he goes from 1 credit to 4. I would prefer a click for a credit, install the play the sure gamble, and then do this and then run. Just so he would have some ability to get into the server. He ends on 1 credit here, 1 credit here. So next turn he will have, I guess he will have 5 credits available. So it's not like the end of the world or anything. But yeah. I install the brand here. I advance this twice. So what I am doing here is I'm setting up resing the brand with send a message here, right? But I do particularly think that I definitely should put the brand here instead of here. The other, oops, sorry. Especially because he's at 5 credits. He's probably not going to be able to do a proper threat on here, on properly threatens stealing at this side of the remote, even with overclock, which is a card we saw earlier. I probably should have highlighted earlier. A concern for the corporation is overclock over here, which is a neutral version, is new neutral and less powerful version of a very famous card in older games, which is Stim Hack. Which is like getting 4 credits for the run, so they could only spend during the run. Yeah. So even if he had the overclock, he would not really viably be able to threaten the server. If the brand was here, installing the, having installed everything, yeah. Nope. The other thing is right here, he actually asks in voice chat, because we were on voice chat this whole time. And by the way, he was a lovely opponent. He was a very charming guy. He sort of asked if, a lot of the dynamics regarding icebreakers and all that sort of stuff. And that's why I put off Gordon. And that's why we do sort of do this sort of stuff. Notice that we're going to do an undo click right here, just so I could sort of explain when he's allowed to jack out, when he's not allowed to jack out, sort of here. So actually, let's just sort of take this time to do it right here. So he runs on this remote. On the first ice, he's not allowed to jack out. So if I res this, you would just face plant into it, and any negative effects that are on any of the subroutines, you know, barring some weird situation that lets you jack out otherwise, If I had res this palisade, or if I res whatever ice that has a very mean subroutine on it, he would not be able to jack out. He would just like face plant into it, and whatever bad thing would happen. And I choose not to res ice in order to, you know, do this as the example. I mean, also because it's a good idea to do it, but here I'm just sort of explaining how, you know, anybody can do anything at any time. Because he was confused, because JNet will let you do a lot of stuff that you are in the rules not supposed to do, but it sort of lets you do in the interface, because broadly speaking, JNet is more permissive. It just sort of lets you do whatever. So you'll notice in my example, I just sort of say, oh, look, I could click for credits at any time. I could just give myself 2 credits whenever I want to. I could lose 2 credits, and I could click myself down 2 credits whenever I want to. Basically just so that if something weird goes on in JNet, if something weird goes on, you know, you mistime something, whatever, you could fix it, right? So in this case, I sort of, in my example, after passing this ice, you decide whether you want to jack out right in this area over here. This just in between, you could decide to jack out right here. And in the JNet interface, actually, let's actually switch over to his view. In the JNet interface, he runs over here. And sorry for like any amount of confusion from this. Over here, continue to approach ice, right? He could choose to jack out here before it's, you know, done anything, right? This is where you are legally allowed to jack out. And like in the JNet interface, through this entire thing, there's all this stuff where this jack out is allowed the whole time, even in the interface, even though in the rules you're not allowed to do it, because there's a lot of stuff that has not been, you know, locked down properly, just because there's not enough, you know, hours in the day to do the dev time to, you know, do this sort of thing. So actually, let's just switch back to what I saw. So I choose not to res this palisade, but I do res this white space. Yeah, because I want him to lose the 3 credits, because he's, you know, really poor right now. I want him to be poorer, because if the runner's on low, so the thing about Netrunner is that if you're on, you know, low amounts of money, you basically can't really do that much. It is harder for you to recover, right? It's very hard for you to recover. Like, in order to play Sure Gamble, you need to have at least 5 credits. Once you have money, you can make more money more easily. But if you're on low money, it's a lot harder to make that money back, right? So he just sort of does some setup stuff. Oh, minor thing. Don't install this unless you're going to use it immediately. So he installs it last click. He should do something else with it. Kind of whatever. And I do something that totally makes sense. I had already said this previously. I'm just going to sort this out. Res the brand. Like I said, should have had the brand here. Should have had this. Maybe not necessarily had the palisade. So what I should have done is put the brand out here, put the tithe here, because the tithe is easy and cheap to res. Palisade, I don't think is that great on R&D or HQ, and that's sort of just the way the ice is designed. But, you know, that's just sort of the way things are. Sometimes you draw all your ice and aren't able to do things the way you want, you know. Now he has to do like all this setup stuff. Again, I don't love the way that all this running is happening. I don't think that he needed to. Did he need to trash this running license? Maybe he did. I don't know. But, you know, just him being on such a low credit total is just a pretty bad position for him to be in. um, because I probably could, if I draw an agenda, I could sort of push it out, right? How do I feel about this? I think it's fine. So here is sort of a thing, is that I actually completely forgot. I didn't actually do the math here. I just sort of wanted to jam for reasons that will be a bit more obvious in a second. Well, actually, not in a second. Will be a bit more obvious once I get into the sort of ending state. So I install the, I first click, I draw the agenda, I dump it in here, and I play a hedge fund. Should I have thought about my last click a bit more? No, no, let's just go ahead. Just keep talking about it. I'll talk about it actually at the very, very end after we're done here. So something I was not actually expecting here is I was not expecting him to get so far up in terms of money. Because he gets 2 drip, he gets 3 more here, and he's able to play a sure gamble and sell the Mayfly and run. And here's the thing, I was not expecting him to be able to do that, to get into this server from starting at 2 credits, or starting at 0 credits on my turn, to get over all the way up to 10. And really, that's probably my bad for not thinking about it that way, but you know, that's life. Here's the other time that you'll notice my sort of big mistake with Bran. He could just run here. He's able to get, he has actually exactly enough money to get into here and steal that win. And yes, that's partially on, well, first of all, it was a big mistake here, not putting, the Brad should have definitely been here instead of the other place. And it was on me to not realize and not actually do the math to see that you could actually play the short gamble and get in. But I do kind of want to talk about these decks and the way they've been constructed and what the sort of the corporation has to do here. And if you haven't played any games at all with these deck lists, I would recommend you doing that before like I recommend doing that before watching the rest of this video. So these deck lists are, or at least the corporation's deck list is kind of similar to the Wayland deck lists in the old core set, which is to say that there aren't a lot of tricks that you could pull to win once the runner is on a lot of money and has all 3 of their breakers installed. So something that is a bit weird to understand once you get into, like, it takes a little bit, I think, to understand, even before you get used to the rules of the game, is that this sort of a strategic thing when it comes to the game is that if the runner has infinite money, the corp has infinite money, the runner will win because they could get into anywhere they want. Sorry, once they have their breakers, if the runner has all infinite money and the corp has infinite money, the runner will be able to win because they could get in anywhere they want. Unless the corporation has some sort of way to, I was gonna say cheat, but has some sort of trick. In a lot of other decks, there are some other decks will have tricks. The starter decks do not have many of those tricks because adding in, the main goal of these deck lists were to teach Netrunner, and adding in that sort of trick would have been a lot more extra complexity in terms of like timing windows, all that sort of stuff, which I don't think Nisei wanted to do for these starting lists, which means that the corporation will usually need to play in the quote-unquote Wayland style, which is to play quickly, play aggressively, draw agendas, try to draw into agendas quickly, and try to score them quickly, and play in, I'm going to say, in unsafe ways, as in you'll have to take in a lot more risk. take on a lot more risk on the turn-to-turn level, which is what I did here, which is why I... It's true that I was not expecting him to be able to get into this server like this, because I was not thinking about Mayfly, because I'd forgotten that this is a breaker that exists that could get into a server as long as you have the money. Actually, was that weird? No, that wasn't weird. And like, but even if he drew the breaker, even if he drew the code key breaker, which I don't remember what it is in these lists, he would have been able to get into this server basically no problem at all. Well, maybe not necessarily no problem at all, because it would have cost more money. But like, if I didn't pressure in this specific case, he wouldn't have been able to get in. And I wouldn't have, well, the other thing is I wouldn't have installed this in here unless I had the seamless launch. Oh, well, maybe he was running every turn, but you know, that's benefit of hindsight. So the other thing is sort of, you might have to sort of look at the amount of cards the runner has drawn, you know, sort of make a educated guess as to whether you think that they've drawn their code gate breaker in this case, which is actually, I actually do want to rewind just a little bit further on. So he did draw how many cards? 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. He had drawn 16 cards and he drawn his breakers and stuff. So the thing, sort of weird thing about these deck lists again is that I don't love the way that Crit had made all these runs on HQ, which, you know, I get why, because if he had, you know, scored any agenda at all, it would have been the win, right? But he had drawn only 16 cards and happened to draw all of his breakers. And I think there's 2 copies of each breaker plus Mayfly, so it's, you know, 8 ways to get into this ice. If drawn 16 cards, you know, it wasn't super unlikely for him to draw into all his breakers, but if he had drawn a bit more aggressively earlier, actually, let's just rewind. No, actually, that's fine, because he drew into it a little bit before. But I do feel like he should have been drawing a bit more aggressively in earlier turns to make sure that he had the breakers for this endgame situation over here. And these were relatively quick games. These 10-turn games, which will happen when you're only playing to 6 points, when you're playing with smaller decks, all that sort of thing. But I do think that he probably should have been drawing a bit more aggressively, if only just to make sure to guarantee, well, not to guarantee, to make it a lot more likely for him to have drawn his extra breakers at the end, because he was making a lot more aggressive runs earlier than I would have thought. Before being sure. And, you know, that's just, I think that's more of a playstyle thing. I think I tend to be safer in terms of the way I play. I want to try to make sure I can get in the server late instead of taking the risk early to make random accesses and get the points. So this might be a playstyle thing and not necessarily a wrong thing for him to have been doing. But I think having seen this ice, having seen these 2 deck lists, in hindsight, I do think that probably should have been, you know, drawing instead of making runs and random accesses. Yeah, but he did win as a runner. So like, in the end, he was right to do what he did. And, you know, results-oriented thinking, whether it's, you know, a fallacy or not is up to you to think, to call. But well, he did end up winning. And actually, let's just take a quick look where he never once clicked for a single credit. And clicking for credits is usually bad. I guess I clicked before, so, you know, it's fine. Damage on 0, cards res 6. I gained a bunch of money. I ended with $7. It's all fine. He accessed 15 cards and got 6 points, which is that average? Yeah, that is actually exactly average. And he did steal from the remote, so, you know, that's fine. It's not like he was immensely lucky or anything. It just sort of happened. Yeah. So yeah, that's just for the first game. And I'll just stop this and do the second game in just a second.